Aloha. In this brief video, I'm going to give you an introduction to the legislative branch at the federal, state, and county levels. One bit of terminology that I'd like to clarify is that sometimes in this video, I'm going to be referring to a house. And if I'm using it in the context of House as opposed to Senate, I mean capital H House, which stands for the House of Representatives. However, and this is a little confusing, the term House refers to generically either the House or the Senate. So you may have to listen closely to the context to understand whether I'm meaning something is a specific power of the House of Representatives or it applies equally to the House and the Senate. And if this is not clear to you, go back and review the vocabulary video because I go into a little bit more detail for that. Okay, the basic function of the legislature is to create hard copy laws, and they're called statutes at the federal and state level, or ordinances at the county level, that apply to everyone. And here's a sample of the books that they keep the United States laws in. It's called the United States Code, and there are many, many volumes that cover all sorts of topics. Now we're going to look inside a volume of the state laws and take a look at our murder statute. This is the real Hawaii murder statute. It starts off with this funny squiggle that I have the blue arrow pointing to, and that just means section. And so this is section 707-701, murder in the first degree. I'm going to take the time to walk through it because it's helpful to you to understand how statutes are created and how they're structured. So you see paragraph 1, and then at the bottom you see paragraph 2, and then you see indented A, B, C, D, and E. You take the paragraphs one at a time. So the first paragraph defines who it is that commits something that we call murder in the first degree. A person commits the offense of murder in the first degree if the person intentionally or knowingly causes the death of, and then you have 5 different categories. And the first is more than one person. So multiple killings will get you the murder in first degree. B is a law enforcement officer, judge, or prosecutor arising out of the performance of their official duties. So if you are a bank robber and you shoot one of the people who's in the bank at the time you're doing the robbing, and they're a judge but they're wearing their casual clothes, you don't know that this person's a judge, this doesn't automatically bump you up to murder in the first degree because you're not killing the judge as a judge. Same thing with the police officer or the prosecutor. If you don't know who that is, that keeps you at murder in the second degree. But if you're killing the judge because it's the judge in your case and you think she's going to rule against you, then that's when this subsection B comes into play. Subsection C is very similar in that it's a person known by the defendant to be a witness in a criminal prosecution, and the killing is related to that person's status as a witness. So again, this isn't a random killing. If you're targeting somebody who's a witness in a criminal prosecution, that also bumps the offense up to murder in the first degree. Interestingly, D can get you convicted of murder in the first degree even if you never pull the trigger of the gun, because D refers to hired killers. If somebody is a hired killer, both the person who does the shooting and the person who hired him are equally culpable of murder in the first degree. And E applies to a person while the defendant is imprisoned, and this simply bumps up killings done in a prison, killing another inmate, killing of a prison guard, etc., making that murder in the first degree. So all paragraph 1 does is describe who can be found guilty of this offense. Paragraph 2 says, and this is how we're going to punish that person. It says murder in the first degree is a felony, and there are 2 classes of murders, or 2 classes of crimes. The lower, less serious offenses are called misdemeanors. The higher level is called felonies. And the rest of the section goes on to say, for which the defendant shall be sentenced to imprisonment as provided in section 706-656. So this also lets you know that this person will be going to jail, and the specifics of the length of the jail time will be covered in this other section. So that is the basic structure of a statute. Because these statutes or these ordinances apply to classes of people, not just individuals, they're what we call higher law than case law in general, because a specific case only refers to the party that's in front of the judge at that time. And we'll go over this more when we talk about the judiciary. But statutes, as you just saw from the previous example, apply to classes of people. For example, the murder statute applies to everyone. The laws about driving apply to all drivers. Laws having to do with child support apply to parents. So that's why statutes have to be worded more carefully, because they have to apply to a lot of different situations. At the Hawaii State Legislature, we have 76 people whose job it is to come up with these statutes. Now, they're broken down into two houses. The first house is the Senate, and there are 25 members. And the second house is a little bit more than double that. It's the House of Representatives, and they have 51 members. In Hawaii, we have a Democratic supermajority in both houses, meaning that more than 3/4 of each house are composed from the Democratic Party. This means that if all the Democrats vote together, they can override any veto by the governor, because to override the governor's veto, you need a higher percentage. So the fact that Hawaii is so heavily Democratic is not a criticism. It's just an observation that it makes it easier than in other states where there's a more equal balance of the parties. So that gives the legislature a little more power in Hawaii than it does in those states where it's more evenly balanced, because it's more likely that the legislature can use its veto override power. The state legislature is organized in committees that do the actual work. These smaller committees are grouped by topic. For instance, education is a committee, labor is a committee, agriculture is a committee, health and human services are committees. They will hear the testimony from the public and from lobbyists from the state legislature and from the private industry. They will amend the bills if necessary, and they're the ones in charge of either holding the bills, which means killing them because they don't let the bill go forward in the process, or passing them out. At the Hawaii State Legislature, there are about 14 committees in the Senate and 20 in the House, and this number can vary from session to session. Just to let you know that there is a breakdown, and so that bills are not heard by the House as a whole, they're heard by the specific committees. And I've provided the website in here for you that will take you to the legislature's website. But don't worry, we'll be covering the legislature's website in much more detail in a future lesson. The state legislature always starts on the third Wednesday in January, and this is covered in the state constitution. And astonishingly, there only are 60 working days in a session. And I say astonishingly because every session of the legislature, there are about 3,000 bills that are introduced. 3,000 bills divided by 60 days. That tells you right now, not all bills are considered in depth at the legislature. And that if you want your bill to pass, you're going to have to make a real effort to get it heard and to get people to support it so that it will be one of the fortunate few that pass. Usually about 10% of all the bills introduced pass each session. So if you have 3,000 bills that are introduced, 90% of them die and 10% of them go on to become statutes. The legislature operates on a 2-year cycle called a biennium. So this makes the situation even more complicated because any bill that doesn't pass, that 90% of the bills that don't pass in the first year of the biennium, are still technically alive and can be discussed again in the legislature in addition to the new 3,000 bills that come in. So you can see again that in order to have your bill passed in the legislature, you really have to be organized, get other people to support it, and really try to get the ear of the legislature. Congress is the federal legislative body. Like the state legislature, there are fewer senators, in this case only 100, and there are 435 representatives. There are 100 senators because there are 2 from each state, no matter how big or how small. And there are 435 representatives because they are divided by how big your population is. This was actually a huge issue when we first adopted our Constitution. Big states like Virginia wanted everything to be done by population, and smaller states like New Jersey wanted everything to be done by a state as a unit. So they compromised in having 2 houses, 1 house where every state gets an equal number of representatives, and a second house where the more representatives you have is due to the size of your population. The head of the House of Representatives is called the Speaker of the House, and there are two different names for people who are kind of the heads of the Senate. The President pro tempore is the senator who has the longest term at the state Senate, at the federal Congressional Senate. But that person doesn't really have day-to-day power. They have the power of being the oldest person there and helping to get their people onto the committees that they want. But the person who really runs the Senate is the Senate Majority Leader. Congress's working days are subject to change. They're supposed to work year-round with August off. I think I did accounting a few years ago, and they worked about 110 days a year. So they work less or fewer days than the state legislature, but the state legislature knows it is part-time and pays its members accordingly, whereas Congress pays their members full-time. So must be a nice job to be a member of Congress. The best information on who it represents you in Congress and what their bills do and what their activities are can be found at their website, which is called Thomas, after Thomas Jefferson. The legislative body at the county level is called the County Council, and they are not divided into two houses the way the federal and the state is. They just have one house, which is called the County Council, and it's composed of 9 members. It's what they call a nonpartisan group, so when people run for election, they don't run as Democrats or Republicans or Libertarians. They run as simply members of the public. The head of the city and county council is called the council chair, and they work year-round. They put in more time than any of the 3 bodies. You can find your council member at honolulu.gov/council. And that's your basic overview as to who is in your legislative branches at the state, federal, and county level, and what their basic functions are.